Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Hold My Drink, where we navigate the news and politics with a chaser of civility. I'm your host, Jen, inviting you to grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and imagine with us how to create a new American identity together. Welcome to this week's Hold My Drink and Counterweight podcast with my co-host, David Bernstein. Today, we have Laura Becker with us. And Laura has a story of her transition, and that's what we're here to talk about. But first, Laura, I know you have a drink. What did you bring to the table?
Just a Stella Artois beer.
Nice.
Happen to be in the fridge.
I haven't had a Stella in a long time. Good choice. David, you?
You know how we recorded earlier today, this is a twofer, and I had scotch. I had literally 2 sips of my scotch from earlier, so now I'm back to that scotch. But now actually, this is the end of the day, so
now you
I'm
might
gonna
actually
really drink
finish
it. I'm gonna drink it.
David, Laura, he sometimes will just he appeases me because I'm like, okay, let's have drinks, It's like,
Right.
So he pours some scotch. I actually do. It looks like water, but it's not. I'm doing a watermelon sparkling seltzer today. So there we go.
Nice.
So Laura, we are here really just to hear and to learn from you. We know that you transition to man and you detransition back again. So just start out there. I mean, start from the beginning. Tell us your story. We're listening.
Okay. Well, so I was always if I'm starting from the very, very beginning, I've always been extremely gender nonconforming and just nonconforming in general. As a kid, I always was very out of place and out of step and out of sync with my peers and everybody around me. Now, I was diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum when I was 11, so that probably explains it. But I never really got any help for that or even really understood what that meant. I just kind of internalized that as like, oh, so I'm the messed up one. I don't feel that way. I feel like everyone else is an idiot. But apparently I'm the wrong one here. But also around that time, I started experiencing some emotional and verbal abuse that chronically led to having PTSD, but that was undiagnosed for most of my life until I was 22. So I got into the bullshit very early. I was about 11 when I started becoming severely depressed and anxious and having a lot of social anxiety, and I already had social problems because I was just kind of different and it was hard for me to fit in. And I became increasingly gender nonconforming because that's just what I felt comfortable as. But it got really bad pretty quickly. And then by the time I was 14, I was having like suicidal thoughts and not feeling safe, kind of like in my own mind. Like I didn't want to be alone. Just really struggling. I became an atheist. Like just I started having suicidal ideation and like self-harming ideation as around 14. And then I was 15, it started to get a little better because I started smoking a lot of weed and drinking. And that kind of helped me ease my social anxiety and make a lot of friends. And that's when I started to kind of blossom into my, I guess, like self that was being stunted by the depression. So I became my very like funky, flamboyant, artistic self. I mean, I always was, but I felt more free to do so. So I started really experimenting more with fashion and gender and, my hairstyle and things like that. And that's when I started learning about gender identities, where else? On tumblr.com. As I learned about the concept of gender queer, and I thought that was perfect for me because I was like, you know what, I'm not gay. Like people kind of questioned if I was a lesbian, and I was like, unfortunately, no. So far, straight. But I felt very, very. I just was an oddball. I was very funky, as I say. That's my whole thing is funky. But I was just kind of off. And so the gender queer, I was like, yeah, why not? Like I'm queer in every way, including gender. And I was very flamboyant and very expressive. And my gender identity, my expression was leaning very much towards like gay masculine in a way, like just like the stereotype of a gay man, like just very gaudy, very theatrical. Because I'm an artist, so I was just wearing the craziest bullshit, like from Goodwill, which is great. It's fun. I still do that. But, it wasn't grounded in a place of self-love because like even though my social life started to get better around that time, when I became more aware of things as from the weed and everything as well, all of the unresolved trauma of the previous like 6 years also came up more. And so I was increasingly depressed and suicidal and self-hating, but I was kind of, growing up and kind of having my, adolescent awakening and, just going through all the normal stuff, but with like the undiagnosed PTSD and the autism, that I still was kind of like, nah, I'm not autistic. Like, fuck that. I'm not gonna, identify as autistic. So it was really bad. I was hospitalized for the first time and tried many different pills, antidepressants. They never really did anything. And so I just kept using, various like recreational pills and drugs. And it was fun, but it wasn't really healthy. And my self worth was terrible. So I was really, what I wanted most was like like a boyfriend, and kind of this love. And I had a lot of attachment problems, as you could imagine, from peers and family, and including the sexual and romantic passionate side of things. So I fixated mostly on being alone, alone, like just with a capital A. Like I'm so desperately alone, and I need to like have sex, and I need to involve in this passionate like romantic love that I really like. But I'm like way too ugly, and I'm way too like worthless, and I'm never gonna you know achieve that. And I'm too like masculine. I'm just not attractive as a woman. Like a straight man is not gonna ever like me. And in my perspective at the time, I guess there's some rationale to that, because I was not exactly the most palatable person for like a high school boy, let's say, to like. I was very butch and also just very, quirky. And but I wasn't really taking care of myself that well, like showering and just putting effort into my appearance in certain ways, get consistently. And I struggled with like weight and stuff. So there was a lot going on, but I just kept fixating on the body and presenting to other people like what are they thinking. So I was hypercritical of myself, but I also was aware that other people did view me as like the weird girl or the girl who doesn't shower and stuff like that. So at least in the recent past, like I got a little better as time went on, but like it was pretty bad. So um that's around the time that I was, getting into the genderqueer stuff. And that's when I started becoming really close friends with several gay men that didn't know they were gay. They, were going through their own identity, sexuality, evolution. And so we all got along really well. I called us like the queer stoners, like, you just smoked a lot of weed and just messed around, just had fun. But I ended up falling like deeply in love with three of them, three different ones. And all of them turned out to be gay. So for me, that was just hell. Like it just couldn't get any worse, because they were just incapable of loving me. But me being so insecure and, all this, I really blamed myself for it. And of course, what is like the catalyst of the main thing to blame was like my body, like being a female, the very thing that I had never wanted to begin with. Like I went through puberty when I was about 9 or 10. Like I didn't want that. I was not ready for that. I really, really didn't want that. And my breasts were very large and I had PCOS. So I had irregular periods, and I was just like, I never wanted this. I did not ask for this. Can I return all of this? And I'm really horny. So can I like, it's just not a good combination. So I started being like, it would make a lot more sense if I was actually a gay man. And it's not that that's not true. It is true. Like it could make more sense. I might have been more successful in certain ways. I can't really say, it's hypothetical. But my personality, the kind of artistry, the sexuality, all of that stuff, if it was just packaged in a way that, was a gay man versus like a straight woman, maybe my life would be better. It would make more sense because it's really difficult to be like an autistic weird girl who doesn't have any friends, who's like, has like PTSD and is like a hopeless romantic, but they can't, like, they keep being in love with gay men. So like, so it's just, it's like, for real, I was legit like, yeah, it sucked. Like, I didn't want to be me. It makes sense. But, I started thinking like more and more and more, ruminating on my body and physical sex, and being around these gay guys. They were all like, you're a faggot, like in an affectionate way, and they would be like, you're gayer than us. And like, we were talking about Grinder and like all this stuff. And I was the horniest one of all of them. So I was like, yeah, but there was a level of, detachment, obviously, because we didn't have the same experience. Even though we were all sexually attracted to men, their experience of male attraction was quite different than mine. And I guess in their undeveloped ways, because we were about 16 or 17. So we were pretty immature about it all. Um, and I just couldn't handle the fact that I would have these gay male friends that they would cuddle with me, they would hold my hand, but they just wouldn't kiss me. They wouldn't, like, they just didn't have the passion element. And I have like an excess amount of passion. So it just, I couldn't deal with it. And the suicidal thoughts just came really hard, and I became extremely, extremely suicidal and hopeless. And it just all spiraled out of control when I was about 17. And that's when I started really having what you could call gender dysphoria. Now, obviously, like, I don't think it was gender dysphoria in the classical sense. It was clearly like trauma, but that's, what it was called in, in, I guess, popular vernacular or whatever. um, so I started wearing a binder, which I really liked, because I always thought like my breasts, they didn't match my aesthetic, because there I was wearing like almost exclusively men's clothes and had really short hair and kind of had this teenage boy look going on. But the large breasts kind of were obtrusive. They didn't fit with that aesthetic. So when I was wearing the binder, I really liked that. Um, but by the time I was going to college, I was just completely hopeless. Like, I didn't even know if I was going to graduate high school. I was so suicidal. I wanted to drop out of school. But I ended up finishing and going to college. But I just was kind of there. I wasn't really grounded in anything. All I could think about was like the unrequited loves, and all I was doing every day, I was just crying and being suicidal and jerking off to people that didn't give a shit about me. You know how it goes. But like, so that's when I started identifying as trans, of course. As I've been debating about for a few years. That's when I was like, I'll take the plunge. I don't want to, but I'll take the plunge and identify as trans, because I don't know what else to do. And these antidepressants have never helped. I've been hospitalized multiple times. They don't have much to say to me there. Um, I have no idea what to do. And I was seeing a therapist that I did like, but she basically was like, I don't know, I don't understand the gender stuff. So maybe you should find somebody else. And I tried to find a gender specialist. I found one clinic, but the therapist wasn't very good. And she ended up just kind of ghosting me one day. I don't really know what happened to her. But one day she just never texted me back, and I never heard from her ever again. So after that, I was like, okay. So I was kind of bouncing around from person to person. And I could tell none of them had the level that I needed. Now, in terms of level, I mean, I guess I kind of mean like giving a fuck, or like having, I don't know, being engaged in the process as much as I needed. but none of them were helpful to me. And I got the sense that they were just sitting there, and that my issues, they didn't seem to understand. And so the only thing they ever had to really say was like, "Oh, you're trans? Okay. That's valid." Like they just weren't good quality counselors. And I could sense that. So I kept not going back to them and being like, I'll try to find someone else. But I never really did find somebody else. And by the time I was 20, it was, 2 years worse than it was before. So I went to an informed consent clinic, and I got a free prescription of testosterone. And then I injected testosterone for 7 months. And right after I started testosterone, I had another suicidal fun episode and went to the hospital again for the third time. And that's when I kind of came out, and I was just like, you know what? Like, the world has been so shitty to me. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, I really don't care. I'm going to adopt an attitude of, I guess, sorry, just being reckless. So it's kind of like reckless, but also I looked at it as like taking control back. I was like, I'm going to actually do something. So for me, that meant, like getting top surgery, getting a mastectomy, because I was like, I need to do something. I've been ruminating for too long. I can't have this go on. I'm going to take back control. And testosterone gave me the energy, unfortunately, to actually do that, as well as doing a lot of other really like reckless, dangerous and unhealthy behaviors. Um, so it got worse with the testosterone, even though it was only on for 7 months. And the surgeon told me that that I needed to go off of testosterone for the surgery, which I was not happy about. He also said you have to stop smoking weed, and I was like not happy about that either. And that's it. I think it's funny. I mean, it's sad, but it's funny. Like that was my priority at the time. That's how like out of it I was, and just a kind of immediate gratification, that the fact that the thing that I was most concerned about in discussing things with him was like, really, like, I have to stop smoking weed. Like that was I was really in a bad emotional state. Um, but I had the surgery when I was 20, and after the surgery, like the procedure went fine. There wasn't any complications, but I just felt the same. I felt the exact same. And around that time, again, I was really out of control. So I was being like kind of an asshole to my friends. And so all of my friends ended up just abandoning me basically. So I had no social circle at all, right after the surgery, which was not ideal. So I kind of took my focus away from the gender and transition stuff and just to like that trauma, because that was more pressing. And so I was like, well, I'll go back on testosterone when I feel more emotionally stable. Of course, that never actually occurred. I didn't. So I did get more emotionally stable, but when I did, and I realized that I probably should, that's when I detransitioned. So I never did go back on testosterone like I planned. And it was kind of a process of, I call it like resting. Like I was resting for maybe a year or two, just really taking it easy, like cooling off on all the drugs and basically doing anything. That's when I laid around and got like sort of obese, because I was just like not doing anything to try and just kind of rest after like all of those events had happened for the past 10 years. So I kind of just chilled out, kind of processed some things. And then I got a psychological evaluation that diagnosed me with having PTSD when I was 22. And that's when I was like, okay, yeah, so that's the special thing that was actually going on this whole time. So I started the healing journey, I suppose, more like, and processing that and the autism, and kind of grounding myself more. And I also started getting into radical feminist materials online, because I was always somewhat gender critical. I was just really irrational. But I was fairly gender critical. And then I started reading stuff about detransition and the trauma. And I was like, oh, so that's me. I'm reading about myself right now. That's exactly what's going on. And then I got connected with other detrans women, and felt finally a sense of belonging in my life, because I like now I'm in the the trauma fandom. But the detransition women, they were so similar to me in ways I'd never seen. So I finally started having female solidarity, which is really, really important because I was so focused on men in like this really lustful kind of external validation way, and never about like female solidarity or solidarity and grounding in my own body, which that's what I started to do, is really just grounding my own body, practicing radical self-acceptance and mindfulness, and just like fairly basic cognitive behavioral therapy stuff that for some reason had eluded me up until that point. um, and then I detransitioned, and it's been about 2.5 or 3 years now, and I've just been doing kind of a rapid amount of healing, just kind of getting all my shit in order, getting a proper therapist that's very helpful, and really getting to the root of my traumas and focusing on the PTSD, the CPTSD, the complex PTSD from the childhood stuff, and kind of just getting back to my inner child and then working my way back. And now I'm here. Now I need to
Mhm.
take a drink of this beer.
Take a sip. Yeah, take a few.
Mm.
Um,
So that's the
Lo-
rundown.
Lo- Laura, I have a question for you. That's a fascinating and and somewhat sad story that you went through all that to be back in your own comfortable sense of self. Uh, do you feel there's a lot of talk that a lot of the gender transitions taking place today are part of sort of social contagion, young, particularly young girls who see it and get attracted to it, and the numbers are something like 1,000% increase in the number of young people transitioning in the past few years. Do you feel in any way that is that true in general, and do you believe it specifically was a factor for you that you saw a lot of other people doing and thought, okay, I'll do this too?
I do absolutely believe that the social contagion is a huge factor for the cohort of young girls, and even boys, mostly the girls though, especially online. For me, it was a little more complicated because I was so socially isolated that I never really had a trans friend group or really felt supported or loved by the trans community, even online. So I didn't really have that social aspect of it, but there was still some social contagion because I mean, Tumblr itself is just a factory for unhealthy coping mechanisms. But so I did see, posts about it online and that sort of material. Um, and I was introduced to it in that way. But it wasn't as personal for me. I kind of I was questioning it already. Just my whole life I was kind of like that. So it wasn't exactly the same as the kind of rapid onset gender dysphoria girls that just go on Tumblr or their friend group does it and then they suddenly like jumpstart into all this. Like I was already, like if that stuff, it didn't really matter what age or how I was introduced to it. I think if I would have been introduced to the concept at any time in my life, I probably would have related to it just because I was so felt such like an alien and I didn't relate to men or women. Um, but I definitely saw the social contagion happening, and I definitely see it happening a lot, exponentially now for other people.
Do you regard yourself as gender dysphoric? Would you have described yourself in that way, if even if you weren't aware of the term at the time? Would you have said, oh, that's that I was? Were you suffering from that condition that so many young people who go through this suffer from?
You mean if I hadn't known about the term, would I have, and someone told me like that's what this is called? I probably would have said yes, but I think it would have been an ignorant answer because what this is was like an amalgamation of like all the chaos, like the depression, anxiety, the trauma, the self-hate. So I would have definitely labeled it as gender dysphoria, and I did label it as that. And now I don't have any gender dysphoria, and I haven't had any gender dysphoria since I detransitioned. Um, and gender is still kind of a bit of a nuisance to me in some ways. I'll say that's annoying. Um, dealing with any
In what
social
way?
norm isn't well, dealing with any social norm isn't obnoxious. And for me, like not having breasts, that's kind of like it's hard to sexually signal, let's say. And I'm already sort of, not performing a lot of femininity rituals. And so whenever I do, like, I very rarely have put on makeup or done something, wear like even women's clothes, like like more feminine types of clothing. I do have a weird feeling that in the past I might have called gender dysphoria. Now I just call it like it's just weird to see myself wearing clothes I've never worn before, and I'm insecure about it because I've never seen myself as a feminine girl and I feel insecure about my appearance. So it's annoying in that like I don't want to have to sexually signal like that in order to, I guess, find, a mate. But I feel pressure to do it. Um but I'm still not really doing it because I'm taking a long break from dating anyway. But just like the breasts, I mean, that's kind of goes beyond like social signaling. That's kind of a physiological thing. Um, but that's definitely part of it when you try to wear, like, I cannot wear certain clothing. Like if I do want to be really feminine and like slutty just for a day or whatever, going out to a club or whatever, which I tried this summer, it was okay. I didn't like it, but I can't exactly do that because I don't have like anything there. But and then if I wear certain cuts, like the scars are really visible. So like that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of gender being kind of annoying. Um, and then also it's annoying because everyone like assumes that I'm non-binary and stuff, and I'm just like, no, like I'm not non-binary. I don't believe in non-binary. Or people, I just don't like being assumed that I'm a lesbian or non-binary or part of any sort of the gendery bullshit. Like, no, I'm just a female, a straight female at that. And it just people overcomplicate what I'm doing, which is
Mhm.
just, being an artist basically. And I don't like that. So I find that really obnoxious.
Yeah. Hey, I've got a question. Would you consider breast reconstruction? Would that be a part of making you feel, more comfortable in where you're at now, or are you just kind of like over it, whatever, I don't.
I mean, I have thought a little about it. I don't think I probably will, because I feel like I dodged a bullet having the surgery without any complications, and I think it would still feel artificial to me now that I'm very much into like reality. I'm very much into like tangible, real, organic matter, and like so I think having like just some kind of implants or something aesthetically, they might be able to look normal, but I don't think it would feel correct, and I wouldn't want to undergo another procedure. I also don't trust doctors and things after this, um, and I don't think that it's necessary to do. Um, I think it would just feel too artificial to me, and it would feel too fake. And after like
So,
having gone through an identity crisis like that,
yeah,
I just cannot. I cannot be fake whatsoever. I'm very upfront about everything.
yeah.
So
So do you feel like a lot of it though too is a lack of the proper mental health in I mean, if there was a someone who would have been able to adequately address your PTSD, your autism, all these things, do you think that you would have gone down the same path? I mean, was that something that was maybe necessary for you to recognize everything in a way? Um,
that was the number one thing. Like that was basically almost the entire thing is the lack of mental health treatment,
mhm,
which is why I speak out about it now and I'm writing essays about it and things. Um, yeah, I definitely had like a lot of compounding mental health issues that were very blatantly obvious. I mean, I was like actively suicidal the day of the surgery, and I told the surgeon that. And I was like, I was telling everyone I was suicidal. Like, I really wanted some help, and everyone would just say like, I don't know how to help you, or they just didn't. I don't know. They just didn't offer me like kind of the basic sort of love and compassion and understanding that was required,
Mhm.
for quite some time. Now I am getting that from my therapist and like a variety of other sources and from myself. But I think if I had had the therapist I had now, definitely don't think I would have ended up transitioning. Or at the most, I think I would have. Um, well, no, I don't think I would have ended up transitioning if I had gotten intervention way earlier, like maybe when I was like 11 or 12. Like that would have been nice, like because all the other stuff just happened because of the kind of core wounds from childhood. So all the other stuff, like the drugs and the sexuality crisis and all that stuff, would have still happened, but it would have happened a lot less intensely, and it wouldn't have been so delusional.
I'm wondering to what degree do you've obviously met some other people in similar situations, people transitioning. To what degree do you feel that this is part of a larger mental health crisis faced by society? And to what degree do you feel that this is just sort of your individual journey?
Well, it's everyone's individual journey, but we're all human, so we all have the propensity for the same flaws and characteristics and behaviors on a spectrum of human behavior. So I think it's absolutely a larger societal issue. I'm definitely under the belief that I don't believe that I don't really believe in the true gender dysphoria. I don't believe in um like the true transsexual. I think that is a different type of person, like the classical archetype of the transsexual versus like what we're seeing today. I do believe that I don't believe that transition is necessary. I don't believe that it's necessary for anybody. I don't think that you can be born in the wrong body. I don't think that it's healthy to transition. Now, there are some people who have done it successfully and they feel comfortable, and I'm happy for those people that it worked out for them. And I also don't believe in limiting an adult's freedom to pursue, I guess, cosmetic surgery if they wanted it, within reason. Um, but I think it is, for the vast majority, I think it is mostly three things: trauma of some kind, um, like sexuality crisis, um, and well, actually four things: attachment issues and a spiritual crisis. So I think if it wasn't just like an underlying mental health condition that was very obvious, like mine was, it's also a widespread epidemic of attachment problems and spiritual, like, lack of spiritual fulfillment. Because not just with gender, but with all of these mental health issues that are kind of on the rise with young people, they're not experiencing life in the same way developmentally that many other generations have. Um, they don't have as many peer supports. They don't have as many positive attachments um, outside of their family, like mentors or just kind of an outer world view. And there is this kind of lack of identity, like a stable, solid identity. So a lot of that was sort of being fulfilled in the past by religious organizations or spiritual sort of movements. And I believe the gender identity movement is a spiritual movement to try and reach a higher self, to try and self actualize and kind of reach this transcendence, and almost like the born again narrative. And again, it's different for every person. It's not a blanket statement of everyone's experience. Um, but I do believe it's mental health related, and I think again, it's mostly attachment problems too. Because if you think about a lot of the people that are identifying as trans, they either have attachment issues as in being too attached to, or not too attached, but unhealthily attached to their peer groups, and getting external validation and the social contagion, or they're more like me and they're more autistic and kind of isolated and feeling alienated from the rest of society. So then they have attachment problems to them, or they've straight up experienced abuse or neglect or some kind of sexuality crisis. So then they have attachment problems in that way. And so, I mean, I'm very into attachment theory. So like I'm always talking about attachment problems in general, but I think it also applies to the gender crisis as well.
You said something out, if you can go back, that in the past there was more peer support. What do you think is the reason today that there is less of that peer support that you ascribe to kind of past generations? What's the cause for that?
Um, the internet, basically,
Yeah.
yeah, the internet. So it's not that they're not interacting with their peers. I mean, there was always people in the past who were kind of introverted, kind of loners who didn't have peer support either.
Mhm.
But all those types of people, as well as just kind of regular, like more extroverted or more well-adjusted people, are going on the internet. So I think it's the internet's the catalyst, the digital culture, the social media culture, because it's giving like it's filling some part of the void of attachment and friendship and relationships, and sexuality and all and fulfillment and I guess creativity and stuff. But it's not it's a detached level, and it's kind of an almost unhuman
Mhm.
level because obviously we are animals, so we are with these creatures going on screens and being on phones all the time and not even seeing people's like body language and things like that. And even especially now it's way more obvious now with the masks and the social distancing. Like I'm really sick of the masks. Like I just want to see like your so I can read your face and things like that. Like, how am I supposed to find a boyfriend if I can't even tell if you're like attractive or not? you know. Um, so I think yeah, the internet, the digital world.
Yeah. Why do you think that it seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to be that this social contagion that David asked about earlier is more prevalent with females transitioning to males? Is that first of all, I guess the question is that true? And if it is true, why do you think it's more related? It's more specific to females transitioning to males than the other way around.
I do think it's true. I think it's the case because females, especially teenage girls, have been known to be more social, right? Like there's the stereotype of the teenage girl, they're always gossiping, they're always with their friends, they're spreading rumors. It's just females are more focused in general on socialization, they're more interested in people. And men are more interested in things. They're not as interested in people. And women are more agreeable, like trait agreeableness. So they are socializing, they're all kind of building each other up, having good, solidarity, which is good, but they're also spreading disinformation because they're teenagers and young people who have a pretty narrow worldview, and they're spreading all this rhetoric within themselves and then being really validating about it because of their agreeableness trait. So they're all kind of, confirming and affirming each other and spreading all this hate, and then, also then spreading all this gossip or kind of vitriol towards the out group, which would be anyone who questions their identity, their parents or anyone online who, um, opposes the gender ideology. So I do think, I mean, it's just because of their female nature. And then again, they're also the type of girls that are online more, the type of girls that are really intelligent. A lot of them are autistic or have ADHD or are just kind of I guess what you would call gifted. They're very very cerebral and intellectual. So they're talking a lot, they're posting a lot, they're coming up with creative memes and they're utilizing their intelligence for the purpose of spreading this stuff, and they get a lot of social fulfillment out of it and social points and affirmation and love and support, which is also what the boys are getting too. But the boys are they're not doing it as much as the girls. There's not as many of them, and the boys are doing it more in a context of a more overt sexuality, versus the girls are doing it in a more romanticized version of sexuality. So they still talk about sex, but they talk about it more in terms of romance and relationships and fan fiction and kind of a more female typical approach to relationships.
Okay, so having gone through this and then back again, what would be your advice to someone who's struggling right now and has questions? I mean, I obviously we already said you're finding the right mental health therapists is huge. I mean, I feel like maybe it's because David and I, we've got quite a few friends, who have transitioned that, and one in particular, Xander, who is a therapist. So I feel like it's more available now, maybe than a few years ago when you were going through this, or do you think that there's still a dearth of the proper care, or maybe even now, some people like what Xander might say, there's people now who are almost gone to the extreme on the other side of actually pushing you into transition. So I'm wondering, like, what someone right now who your age, 17 years old, when you started to really, if I got your timeline right, really have go into crisis, what would you say?
I would say, yeah, apart from getting like a proper like therapist that's not gender affirmative, someone who's going to be more exploratory about all of your issues, I would say probably the number one thing is radical acceptance of self, of the past, of just reality, and which is the hardest thing. Obviously, the accepting cognitive dissonance, looking for the truth, and being a little bit detached from your emotions, and letting go of the shame and everything is definitely, it's a grueling and long process. But you need self acceptance in order to reach self forgiveness, and then to reach self love. And once you reach self love, then you can start to reach like the self actualization, a self fulfillment. And again, not just with self, even though I think it's mostly to do with self for these trans people, but acceptance of other things, like acceptance of other people's behavior. And then you can start to sort of forgive the behavior, or at least have a rational view. Like if you've been abused, or I don't know, someone breaks up with you, or someone says something rude to you online, like, just having more of an internal locus of control. I mean, again, just like kind of basic CBT and concepts, I guess. But although radical acceptance is, and mindfulness is more of a DBT concept, but yeah, radical acceptance, self forgiveness, self love, grounding, physical grounding, in reality, and then again, like healthy, secure attachments to people that aren't just validating you or telling you whatever you want to hear, but compassionate, kind of close, intimate friendships and relationships, and getting away from people like insecure attachments or abusive relationships. And then trying to I'd say creativity. I'm an artist, a writer, musician, photographer, podcaster. I do a lot of stuff. I make a lot of stuff. um so you don't have to make as much like stuff as that, but like just being creative in the sense of constructing a purpose that is outside of yourself, that is not based around I guess the ego, but more about expression and more about helping other people, or kind of higher goals, higher values, like truth and love, and could even just be beauty. Like I make a lot of this abstract art. It doesn't necessarily mean or contribute anything to society, but it's just the value of exploring the mind. But again, it's just always comes back to the acceptance, because you need to have a baseline of rational acceptance to be able to move forward into any of the other levels of like higher values.
I think though, like what you said is so true, but it sounds to me like a lot of this attachment issues. I mean, outside of your traumatic experiences, I mean, that's being a teenager. A lot of it is just like, I mean, you self actualization often comes, if you're looking for it, maybe quicker, but it also comes with maturity, and with like you just kind of knowing who you are. I mean, you're not supposed to know who you are when you're 15 years old. Like,
Right.
I don't know anyone who did know who they were, and so I guess that's kind of one of the things that I worry about, is people are automatically assuming if you don't know who you are, you haven't reached that self-actualization, you're having questions about gender, because those are the questions that are mainstream right now, that you're automatically, a lot of therapists might just go, oh, well, I've got the answer, and where they're just being normal teenagers. And maybe with And again, if later on they are like, no, I'm serious, I'm a man, I'm a woman, great. But I think that almost there's this trend of almost being steered in that direction, when a lot of it seems to me to be teenage issues.
Yeah, no, it
Am I?
absolutely. It's adolescence, it's development, it's immaturity and naivete. And like what you said about, you have to, all these people want to, these kids want to like fast track their fulfillment. It's
Mhm.
because but the fulfillment that they think that they're fast tracking is actually rather shallow. It's very, like I said, the internet culture based. Like, it's very
Mhm. Mhm.
political. It's like basic labels, like what's your gender identity, what are your pronouns, what is your political affiliation, who did you vote for, like do you hate this person, do you support that person, Black Lives Matter, like all that. Like, it's just slogans and pretty shallow labels of what identity is supposed to be. That's
Mhm.
why, like,
Mhm.
I emphasize like the creativity, like doing something and not just ruminating all the time, but doing something that, and also doing something that doesn't involve like a mastectomy. For me, like I really needed to, I don't know, just take a walk or like start making art, like the things that I eventually started doing. But creating something, like what is your identity, like what do you do, what do you contribute, like what are your values, are you a kind person, are you a someone who's a good listener, are you someone who is a critical thinker, do you I don't know, make pottery, are you really good at writing, like what do you actually do besides like having all these labels? Because I think
Mhm.
traditionally that's what society's been more so based
Yeah.
around, like who you were was like literally your profession. And
Mhm.
that's I um and that obviously has its limitations as well, because if you're only like, well, career woman or like plumber, you know what I mean, or like,
Mhm. Mhm.
artist, even like anything can be too limiting if taken to an extreme. But also when you have too much freedom, then nothing means anything. So that's why, like, the postmodernist sort of era we're living in, I call myself like a postmodernist artist and all that. Gotta do it. But the postmodernism where you're deconstructing everything in order to attempt to obtain more freedom, it's gone a little too far. Now we've got too much. Everything is unregulated. There's no boundaries, and we're getting away from any traditional value. Like even just saying the word traditional is like, what are you, like some conservative scum? Like, and that's how I used to think too. Very naive kind of way, but just basic principles, like what a man is or what a woman is, or like biological sex actually is a thing. Like, we're trying to deconstruct everything so much that now it's become very nihilistic. Um, and that's never good when a society like starts getting into this hedonistic, like idealistic but nihilistic phase. That's usually when some like pretty destructive, I guess, to total to can I speak totalitarianism or authoritarian, um or just something happens because people are getting then bored because they keep trying to push the limits more and more. Like, how far are we going to push the label? How many people are going to be in the LGBTQ plus acronym at this point? Like, it's just everyone's in there now, like just it's all kink basically. Like, it's just gone too far in one direction. So now we got to kind of rein it back in, which is obviously all, that's just human nature, like pushing the boundaries, because we're very smart beings. So we need to, find out what's out there. But it goes a little, it keeps it, it's a balancing act, and life is always a balancing act. So that's why I always like preach about the mindfulness thing, because it's like you have to be able to sit with everything at once without reacting too much to it, and being aware of all these moving pieces, which is, well, it can be hell if you are focusing on it in a negative way. I know that perfectly well.
I mean, I'll end on this because you just said something that I really found fascinating. Fast track fulfillment. And I think that that goes and ties into a lot of things that you talked about, the internet culture, I mean, the instant gratification of that, where we've become impatient. We've got this instant gratification. I mean, Amazon comes in 2 days, right? I mean, if you're struggling with something, you want it done immediately. And I've kind of got that personality too, where I just, Come on, come on. So I think that there's just so many things at play. Yeah, so just I feel I don't discount that there are. I mean, you had said that you're not sure that there really is such a thing. I think as transsexual or transgender, whatever. I know those two terms are not always used interchangeably. Which is another issue because we just play with the language, and then you get people get upset with you if you don't label, like you said, if you don't label right, then I mean, it's this labeling. So anyways, I have no problem if people feel that way and go on with it. But I think what my problem is more that just this fast, like you said it really well, fast track fulfillment, and there's this lack of critical thinking or deep thought that you mentioned, like the mindfulness that might that if taken that path might turn people in different directions, and if it doesn't, great, do you. But I feel like we're fast tracking things where we're not giving people the time to even kind of have that self actualization that
Hmm.
you're talking about. And it's so funny because we in schools now, SEL and social emotional learning and all this stuff is kind of like the buzzword. So it's like we talk about self actualization. I mean, I think that that's kind of where this SEL and all this is, and yet we're farther away from it than we were before. There's like a mismatch there.
I think it's because, well, again, I think it's because it's too immediate. Like I said, the immediate gratification, it's too shallow. It's like, oh, this and that. But again, it's like the traditional, I don't know, just like traditional values. I I'm not religious, I'm an atheist, but just like I've been having more of an appreciation for religion and the institutions of religion because I realized that they at least were attempting to have some sort of structure for all this chaos that's going on and give people some kind of like ground framework for like moral values. Now it's just it's more of a free for all, at least online. It's a godless place to say that online because it's just like in group or out group, right or wrong, black or white. It's
Mm.
very reactionary and emotional. There's not a lot of rational mind going on. And people have been encouraged to explore their emotions so much, which is good. This whole thing, like open up, know your feelings, like that's good. But there's a cultural trend of just like shallow psychotherapy, just shallow clinical terms, shallow therapeutic language being misused
Mhm.
by people that they don't actually understand or appreciate the concepts.
Mhm.
It's just like hold space, your trauma, like all of that. It's like, no, like trauma is actually a real thing. It's not just a shitty event. It's like it's a different thing. And all this language is being misused in a widespread way that allows people the, I guess, luxury of being emotional and overreactive and being, really shitty online and having poor boundaries or whatever. They don't actually give them a framework or like healthy container for maintaining their emotions and rational thought. In DBT, they call
Mhm.
that wise mind when you have a
Mhm.
balance of emotional mind and rational mind. And then the two together are wise mind because you need both. But there's no wise mind going on right now. And because part of it is because these people are children and their brains are not fully developed. Like again, I say I'm 24 and a half, almost 20, almost 25. And only in the past 2 years have I actually physiologically felt like more mature. And I
Mhm.
really, really notice a difference. Part of that is obviously becoming more stable and stuff, not being suicidal, but just the prefrontal cortex, I'm really talking about that a lot now because I'm like, wow, it finally happened for me. I'm so glad. Because it really does help. And so we're, all these people that are kind of leading the discussions are either adolescents or young people, probably 24, 5 and under, or like, well-intentioned like clinicians that are kind of leading this gender ideology and then being like, if a child knows they're trans, like you're not going to debate this, even though it's like, why we don't let a child or an adolescent like drive, like car insurance rates for people my age are like insanely high because they're not good drivers. We're letting, like I was 20 when I had like a mastectomy and I was like actively suicidal. Like why was that allowed to happen? I mean, I just it's just kind of the children are leading the discussion because people want to look towards like the innocence or wisdom of like adolescence, I guess. I don't really know why. Maybe because of the nihilism, maybe because they're nostalgic. There's a ton of nostalgia in like the millennials, like people who are in their 30s right now, really nostalgic for culture. And part of that was also the like commodification and the rise of the digital culture, because this is the very beginning of the internet age, this is the digital age. Like Gen Z is the very start of that sort of phenomenon. So it's just all happening really rapidly and very quick, very like instantaneous, and it's very shallow, and you need to be able to, and children, like adolescents and young people, are not able to have the gratitude or patience or appreciation. And I mean, even a lot of adults don't have that. Even a lot of people in their 30s or 40s or 50s don't have that capacity. And it's really, our brains are getting rewired to react to the dopamine hits of the like the internet and the social media. So
Yeah.
it's understandable, but we
Yeah.
need to be mindful of that, and
Right.
then ground ourselves back in kind of a little bit more traditional just sense of how to function so we can actually function.
I truly think that, in whatever 100, 200, 500 years from now, we'll look back at this era, much like we look back at the Industrial Revolution, the hunter gathering, the farming, agricultural revolution. I mean, something has happened that's so fundamental that it is actually changing the way our society operates. And I think we're in the throes of that now, even though obviously computers and phones and whatnot have been around for several decades. But that's nothing in the course of time. Several decades is nothing. And we're still learning, particularly people my age, considerably older than you, how to how to navigate that. And I guess in some ways I'm a little nostalgic myself, and maybe it's just because I'm older and I remember the time before all of this. But where you mentioned this before, like the body language and that empathy and that compassion, I feel was much more accessible back then, because because it was in your face, and now everything's like flat, we're flattened. And I think that I'm optimistic sometimes that will work. I think humans are really ingenuous. Or that's not the right word I wanted to use. I see I'm having my own language problems, but we're very innovative was the word. Sorry, I wanted to use in adapting to new norms and new stressors. But man, yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm watching like this transition in real time, and it's going in so many ways, from gender issues to racial issues to war. I mean, larger issues of war. It's just, yeah, fascinating. Fascinating times.
Like I can't look away, like
Yeah.
I as much as sometimes I'm just like, I need to just take a walk and just be in nature, like not listen to anything. I still find myself listening, like absorbing myself deeply in like podcasts and just constant media. And like, cause it's just too interesting. Like I just want to learn about it all. And, sometimes you just need to take a break and ground yourself.
Yeah, I want to be like Thoreau or something and just go like hide out in the woods for like, I don't know. And then I wouldn't know what to do. I mean, sometimes now I have my phone in my hand and I'm doing something on it that's different than maybe what I would like a phone call or whatnot. And I'm like, where's my phone? Really? It's in, like, it's like an attachment to me,
Right.
So I say I want to do that, and I mean it, I think, but it's like, I mean, I think it would be a detox.
It would be, yeah, it would be. It's really, I mean, I don't know. Like, can society function? I mean, I live with my grandpa. He's like 81, and he doesn't use a phone. He doesn't use the internet. He has like a landline phone that he doesn't even answer the calls. Like, I'm just like, and I wonder, like, can people function? Like, can we actually function without this technology? And then I look at him and I'm like, I mean, he seems to be pretty happy. I mean, but he's not, like, if he had to have any sort of job, besides, I don't know, maybe farming, like just being a farmhand, or that's what he was when he worked. You would need to know how to send an email. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know. It's just, it's happening now. We can't stop it. We shouldn't try to stop the progress of technology, but we have to maintain it. We have to have some boundaries and
Right.
stick to our values of like compassion and love and acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. All things that we have to work through in this new revolution, or technological revolution. I wonder what they'll call it when we're
Yeah.
dead and gone. Anyways, well, Laura, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having a drink with me. I just loved hearing your story, and you are clearly, you're still so young, and you're so grounded right now. I was just I learned a lot from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation and having an excuse to drink a beer.
To drink a beer.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hold My Drink. Like or subscribe to the show and check out the show notes for links to source material and to our website, where you can find what each of us is reading every week, different news with different views. If you have a topic that you would like us to explore, drop us a line. And join us next week as we say, hold my drink, and the conversation gets real.